Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining me today in this webcast for first-time homebuyers. It's a privilege for me to be here and present this to you today. And before I make a formal introduction, I want to start off by telling you the basics of what we're going to cover. First of all, we want to get into showing you how to create a checklist prior to you looking for your first home. We want to talk about how to avoid surprises in this first-time home buying process. We want to show you how to create a budget and how important it is to stick to that budget. We want to help you decide what you want to look for before you start looking. That will make the process more simple for you. I'd like to talk about the benefits of working with professional realtors, tell you how to select the right realtor, and then, of course, the 5 top hints to avoid making a mistake in this first-time home buying process. Well, my name is Mark Jennings-Bates, and as you can see on the screen, I'm a realtor with Coldwell Banker Horizon Realty here in Kelowna. For those of you who aren't aware, Horizon Realty typically dominates the annual awards for the Canadian Coldwell Banker franchise and is known for the quality of its professional realtors. I am certainly proud to be a part of that team. I've been involved in the real estate industry since 1994, and I've sold well over $100 million worth of real estate in that time. Hopefully my experience in the real estate field can help you in this important home buying process. In fact, I remember 27 years ago back in the UK, as a young 20-year-old with my wife buying our first home. And I can certainly empathize with that feeling of excitement and trepidation, all wrapped up into the same tense process. Our objective today is to really give you some tips over the next 30 minutes or so to help you organize that process of purchasing the home. To put this whole thing into perspective, this is likely the largest personal purchase you'll ever make. It deserves more than a cursory thought or an emotional decision to get you on the right track. Buying a home, even for an experienced buyer, can be very complicated. It can certainly be full of risk, and likely you're finding out it can, of course, be quite stressful. We really want to minimize those negative factors and make this process more of a positive and memorable experience for you. Let's get into the agenda a little bit in some detail. I want to show you and talk a little bit more about what we're going to be doing. I want to show you how to create that checklist, as I mentioned. That's very important. It's going to help you actually evaluate the homes that you start looking at once you get into the actual process here. I want to talk about the surprises and how to avoid them. They can be very expensive and they can cause an awful lot of stress for you if you make the wrong decisions. I'd like to talk about how to create a budget and the importance of really being disciplined with that budget. I'd like to help you decide what you're going to look at before you start looking. And then we'll talk about the benefits of working with a professional realtor. We want to talk about how to select that professional realtor for you. And then finally, we're going to talk about the 5 top hints to avoid making big mistakes. At the end of this presentation, I've actually got an interview with some young first-time homebuyers who we helped earlier in the year, and they can perhaps give you a couple of their tips that will be recent and will help you as well. So let's start by talking about this checklist. First of all, I want to congratulate you. The fact that you're online to listen to this tells me that you're thinking about your future. Too often people spend more time planning a weekend away than they do planning for the largest purchase in their life, a home purchase. As a first-time home buyer or as a repeat buyer, the process to organize yourself in this complex decision is really very similar. Since the purchase is so large financially, a small mistake buying a home can have repercussions for many years into the future. As a result, I would always recommend that potential home buyers create a buyer's matrix, if you like. It's a sort of a checklist. And in preparing the checklist, you can ensure that you are prepared to purchase your home. In thinking the process through from start to finish, it's really not hard to begin to construct the list. The first item I would recommend is to first compare renting to buying to ensure that you can support your decision. Owning real estate is not for everybody, and it certainly should not be primarily viewed as an investment for most people. Really and truly, you're purchasing a roof over your head and shelter for your family. From a simple economics point of view, it bears analysis to compare the cost of ownership to the cost of renting. For some people, the simple economic comparison is not the only decision-making factor, but it will force you to think about the value of the benefits of home ownership. When purchasing a home, some of the costs of ownership may be somewhat higher, but the trade-off for many is the ability, in Canada at least, to build tax-free equity in your home, since historically home values have tended to increase. For other people, the simplicity of having one rent check to pay at the end of the month and know that someone else is paying the rest of the bills and the maintenance is really a simple decision. The significant question to ask is if owning a home is uneconomically sound, Why do we have landlords in this economy? It's really a lifestyle decision for you at the end of the day. The next area I would encourage you to look at is budget. What are you prepared to pay, not what is the maximum amount you can borrow? As a couple or even as a single person, the peace of mind knowing that your purchase fits within a predetermined budget is really of utmost importance to you, particularly in this economy. There will always be surprises when you venture into home ownership, and they largely cost money, so be prepared to have some available cash at the end of the month to be able to save for the unexpected. Next on the list is identifying a region of the town that you wish to live in. There are unique flavors to each quadrant of any town. To trade in the value of an area that you like to get a great deal in an area that you like less is going to diminish the value of your purchase. Of course, you may end up with a few areas of town that you like and you're willing to live in, but look at key criteria, which may include your commute to work, the ability to take your children to school, availability of transportation, parks in the area, the security of the area, the age of the homes in general, and proximity to services. Once you've narrowed this down, you'll be far ahead of many potential home purchasers, and you'll have a focus that eases the buying process for you. Take time to walk in that area, visit coffee shops, stroll through the parks, and chat to some of the residents about why they like the area. Making new friends before you move will also make the transition easier after your purchase. Next, I would recommend you look at the type of property you're interested in buying. Do you want a managed lifestyle where your landscaping and snow removal is taken care of and you have security? If you do, you're probably looking for a strata type of development. Do you want a condo apartment with the added common facilities? Would you like to live in a single family home with a large lot? Or do you not have time to do much landscaping? Do you prefer spending lots of time outdoors, or do you like the indoors? Do you like neighborhoods, or do you prefer some solitude? Do you appreciate views? All of these questions will guide you in your quest to focus your search and condense the mental process in purchasing a home. A big question to answer will be, how much immediate work are you willing to do? For many people, the ability to do some renovation work is a way to add some sweat equity in terms of value. For others, their current lifestyles are too busy to fit in any DIY projects. The important thing to do is to think about what you're prepared to accept as not perfect. It will make a difference on how you view a potential home and how you assign a value to that home. Size of any home is an important consideration and will impact your monthly budget. New technologies such as geothermal heating and cooling can often lower the budget, but in general, expect a larger monthly outgoing if you purchase a larger home or a larger lot. Of course, prime consideration should be given to how many years you may own your home, whether you plan to raise a family in your new home, and how much entertaining you expect to do. One important question to answer on your checklist is, why are you purchasing? Do you have a desire to make money from purchasing your home, or are you concerned about providing shelter for your family cost effectively and comfortably? Answering this question will again allow you to make the most out of your journey to find the right home. Next, you should look at whether you have access to the money that you need. Wanting to buy a home is one thing, but before you start looking, finding an institution to lend you money is the most important step. If you contract a realtor to work with you prior to doing this, you may be wasting your time, your realtor's time, and potentially the time of the sellers and their realtors if you write an offer that cannot proceed simply because you don't have financing. The value of a good mortgage advisor cannot be overstated. There are undoubtedly other questions that you could add onto your list, but these primary questions will get you started. Let's talk about avoiding surprises. You've certainly taken the right step in seeking the information that we're giving you today. The best way to avoid surprises is to use the services of professionals who can guide you through an unfamiliar process. They usually have experience that tells them what can go wrong, when and how much it will impact your purchasing ability. One example that comes to mind earlier last year, in fact in 2010, was a client who wanted to buy a rural property. And when we put in an offer on the property, some research led me to believe that it was a distinct possibility that the home he was looking at may not have had an occupancy permit. Fairly simple thing, easily overlooked. The realtor certainly couldn't answer any questions as we spoke to them. And so we decided to put in a condition on the contract that the seller of the home would in fact guarantee that they would bring the building that we were looking at up to building code and access an occupancy permit, show us what they had, or get one. As it turns out, it was quite a large dilemma for the seller of the property, and the local municipality said that no, there was no occupancy permit, there was in fact no building permit, there was in fact no permit for the septic system on the property, and so what looked like a dream home could have turned into a real nightmare had we not done that research. During any transaction, you may find that what you thought was a financing approval from your bank would actually turn out to be only a conditional approval, and so serious challenges may present themselves at the end of the transaction, similar to what may have happened in this example that we just relayed to you. You may have been told that you had an approval, but in fact never received anything in writing. Perhaps you see a property that's for sale by owner, you enter into a contract as my client could have done without the guidance of a professional realtor. That contract, as you hear, could create many kinds of liability for you through the process, some that you may not be aware of, and in all honesty the seller may not have been aware of, and quite frankly they can cost you a lot of money to resolve. Buying a home that appears to be good quality but leaves you with many issues to resolve that were not apparent can be a real challenge. The fact that you now have a plan will help you avoid these types of surprises as much as possible. They are not only frustrating, but they can be extremely costly and place you in a very serious legal position if you do not plan ahead. The golden rule in real estate is to do everything in writing. Contract law is very complicated in Canada, and unlike most law in Canada, a contract in real estate does not exist unless it's specifically in writing. That means that shaking hands with a good friend and agreeing to buy their home certainly does not guarantee that you have any rights to that home at all. Your friend could in fact accept a written contract from somebody else in the meantime, and you're left with no contract or rights to force any kind of an agreement with them. Let's talk about how to stick to a budget. This may seem a very obvious part of the discussion, but like building a home, too many people create a budget and get drawn into spending more than they ever could have believed they would. It's not uncommon to see with my clients personally that initially they call me and indicate they have a top price of maybe $250,000 to find a home. Throughout the process, they start sending me listings they'd like to look at, and some of those homes are $380,000 rather than $250,000. Have a budget in mind before you go for a financial approval and before you start looking for a home. The difficulty for most people comes in getting emotionally attached to a property that they can't afford. The first thing to do is to only look at properties within your price range. This is not a reality TV show. This is for real. While a bank may tell you that you can borrow more than you need, you really don't need it. Going back to our earlier statements about surprise costs, you should be prepared to have money left over at the end of each month and not live on shoestring from month to month. Remember that the budget needs to include any repair and renovation you plan on doing to the property once you have purchased it. While some lenders may create an allowance for this on the amount they're prepared to lend you, many will not, and you're on your own for the post-purchase renovation costs. The best place to start is to ask your realtor for a guide to the values per square foot that similar properties are selling for in the region you're looking at. For example, if you have a budget of $300,000 and properties are typically selling for $200 per square foot, then you could budget to live in a 1,500 square foot home. You may be able to find a home with some unfinished basement space that will allow you to add sweat equity into the home, but don't go and look at 3,000 square foot properties hoping that a seller may be tempted to take a low offer at $100 a square foot. Chances are you're going to be disappointed. Your financial institution will raise an eyebrow because you've put a contract on a home that's seriously undervalued in the neighborhood, and their assumption, like mine, would be that something's probably wrong with it. Recently, I showed a client through a property that seemed to be a bargain. In fact, they'd called me and said, "Can we take a look at a particular property?" And we did some research and found out that the property wasn't completed, so there was some work to do, but there was obviously more wrong with it. In the end, as we toured the property, it was very obvious that there were some very serious geotechnical issues with the concrete work and the ground around the house, and it would take not only a big budget, but a lot of professional help to resolve that. Sadly, that was the end of the journey looking at that property, but it did help the buyer focus on looking at other properties that were more suitable for them. Some of you may have never been in a position before where you've had to create a budget. So we've created a package for you. It's actually an ebook that you can download for a small cost at KelownaBuyer.com. It includes budget planning worksheets and various documents and hints that will guide you through the home purchase process. For most first-time home buyers, at least in Canada, several areas will be definitive cost centers for you, and you need to be aware of that before you start the process. Of course, putting a down payment together is critical. Many people will scrimp and save to purchase a home so that they have the largest down payment possible, and thus they reduce their monthly debt burden to the mortgage company. Other people or couples are not so fortunate and will be forced to find a family member who is able to gift them the funds for down payment. The critical aspect of this phase is all of the decisions you've made prior to applying for financing. While access to consumer debt, for example, Costco credit cards, Zeller's cards, Visa and MasterCard, for example, are all easy, they all have an impact on your ability to borrow funds for a mortgage, and the impact is negative. Buying a new car on lease may be a cool thing to do, but it's certainly not cool when it comes time to buy your first home. It can impact your ability to qualify for a mortgage and reduce your chance to own that first home. If you have to, you can find a way to sell that car, remove the financing from your credit rating, and purchase an older car for a while to go to and from work. It may be the smartest decision that you've ever made. Let's talk about home inspection and testing. One important thing to remember here is that this may not be restricted to one inspector. If you're looking at an area that maybe has termite or bug problems, you'll need to hire a specialist. If you're purchasing a rural property with a septic system or a private well, they'll require specific testing protocols beyond the normal expertise of a home inspector. While a typical home inspector may cost you approximately $500 on a typical first-time home, the peace of mind and security knowing that the property does not have serious structural challenges is worth every penny. Budgeting for these various professional services is crucial to your ability to validate your purchase. If you're contemplating a high-ratio financing, then you'll likely need some form of government or private-backed insurance. This is normal, but it does have a cost, as will in fact the financial institution for lending you money. Those costs typically can be wrapped into the mortgage, but you should be aware of any costs involved before signing any documents or indeed agreeing to put an offer on a home. Legal costs and disbursements are obviously necessary in a home purchase. You're required to pay a certain amount or required to access a certain amount of legal work or conveyancing. In some provinces, such as British Columbia, it's not required to use a lawyer. A notary is an affordable option in many instances. However, a notary cannot give you legal advice. They can only process the documents required for registration of your name and details on title, as well as the details of any financing and security they require. HST and property transfer tax, sometimes known as the sunshine tax in BC if you're moving here from another province. If you're purchasing either a new home, a home from an HST registered entity, or a home that has had a home-based business in it, you may also be eligible to pay HST on the transaction. Or you may be liable if the transaction was subject to HST and the seller did not remit their funds. Legal advice can be imperative, but above all, a realtor will be able to assist you in writing the contract in such a way that any offer will include HST payable. HST currently in BC is at 12%, and there are various rebates available to you as a new home buyer, and they're identified in our downloadable ebook at kelownabuyer.com. Property transfer tax is not unique to BC, but if you're moving here from Alberta, it may be a surprise that nobody advises you of. Be aware that it is an additional cost at closing. As a first-time home buyer, you may be eligible for certain rebates if you meet particular criteria that the government defines from time to time. It is complex, and we try and keep the information updated as much as possible in the downloadable ebook. Finally, one thing to remember is that you've got moving expenses. There's always a cost to moving. You may have friends who can assist you, but likely there are some direct costs associated with a move or indirect costs, such as time off work. Let's talk about deciding what you want to look at. Several years ago, my wife and I were building one of our homes, and we identified a budget before we started the whole process. We'd already purchased a piece of land to build on, and so we decided how much house we could put on that lot. We were not prepared to go over budget. We started by taking a blank sheet of paper and writing down the rooms we wanted so that we had a general idea of how to divide the space. Next, we looked at the basic floor plan. We didn't need a basement, so we had a slab on grade, and then because of the location, we wanted a grade level entry home so that we could maximize views of the river from the top floor. The size of our floor plate was dictated by our budget based on a cost per square foot for the finishing level that we desired. We then took the 2 floor plates, main and above main, and drew bubbles to represent the amount of approximate space we needed for each room and roughly where it should be located in the home for the purposes of function and daylight. Typically, these are referred to simply as bubble diagrams. We passed that on to our designer, who came up with an amazing floor plan, really because we'd done a lot of homework. There's a famous author that you may have heard of called Stephen Covey, who wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. The first habit that he writes about was that you need to begin a project with the end in mind. Now we've already given you a few hints on how to do this. If you've forgotten already, the information is contained in our ebook about purchasing your first home that's available to download at KelownaBuyer.com. The best way to do this is to sit with a blank piece of paper, just the way my wife and I did several years ago. You need to start with a list of positive attributes that you would like your home to have, and don't be afraid to be definitive. If you want 3 bedrooms, write down 3 bedrooms. If you want an open floor plan, write down open floor plan. And keep doing that until you've got an exhaustive list of what you're looking for. The next list will be what you're willing to compromise. The age of the home might be variable depending on whether it's been renovated or whether you'd like to renovate. This will allow you to flex the criteria a little, which at the end of the day will really help your realtor in narrowing down the choices. The last list is what you are not willing to compromise. This might be the location, it might be the type of home, it could be the minimum number of bedrooms, and again, the more definitive you are, the easier the process is going to be. Essentially, what this is going to do is create a matrix, or a sieve if you like. It will allow you to start looking with some specific criteria and save your time in looking at houses that are just not appropriate. This process is called a sieve analysis. If a home that you've selected can fall through the sieve, then it is one you should look at. If it gets caught in the sieve because some of the criteria do not match up, then simply throw it out. This process alone can save you so much time and frustration. In the long run, it's amazing, not to mention the confusion that can be created in the process. Imagine what it's like trying to review 20 homes that you looked at in the past 4 weekends. It's nearly an impossible task, and one that can very easily lead to a mistake. The added benefit of this approach is that it can actually lead to a matrix evaluation of the homes that you do look at. Create a grid of the criteria that you are looking for and write down the addresses on the side of that grid. You can then rank the various features of each home and add up the total score of each of the homes. This may not be how you decide the ultimate home for you, but it will clearly indicate a few winners that you should be looking at. Well, let's move on to the benefits of working with a realtor. The greatest benefit of working with a realtor, in fact, is they're free. The seller has a contract with the selling realtor to market their home, and the realtor, the buying realtor who brings a buyer to them, is going to be paid from that contract. Real estate transactions are fraught with risk, and really a realtor can help you simplify this process. Whether it be someone who is selling a property but does not have the right to, or a property that has very restrictive easements on it that without a realtor or a lawyer would be hard to establish, all of these challenges can be very complicated. They're all risk, and a realtor can simplify that process for the buyer. A realtor, of course, will keep themselves educated in regards to a region and the municipality that they're looking at. They will be able to advise you on values of sales compared to listing prices, the current amount of activity in the region, perhaps the length of time that a listing has been on the market for, and possibly if there are any challenges with the real estate title that you've not been aware of prior to making an offer on that property. You should expect your realtor to give you a detailed evaluation of the several properties you wish to look at. And one of the key criteria I would recommend you look at is what is the appeal for the property when you wish to sell it. In some instances, a major road project planned for the area can diminish the value of the property that you're looking at considerably, and you should be made aware of that by your realtor. A realtor, of course, has a network of people that they've worked with in the past. You should talk to them about what that network is, what professionals they would recommend are involved in the process for you, and how they can connect you to some of those people who may be able to help you. Remember, a realtor is a professional who's been trained and is bound by association membership ethically to commit to recurrent training. Because of the nature of the training and the risk involved with real estate transactions, realtors are required to carry errors and omissions insurance, which offers you some protection in the instance where a realtor may make a mistake, and that mistake leads to some costs for you. Of course, good negotiating skills is critical for you. Legally, a realtor will have an agency relationship with you that will ensure that they will negotiate for you on your behalf without compromising your position. And in fact, they have a legal fiduciary duty to act on your behalf to achieve the results that you desire. And remembering, of course, at the end of the day, the realtor is usually free to you as a buyer. Let's talk about how to select a realtor. You know, the most important thing is to consider the relationship. Can you work with this person? You'll have to work with the realtor you plan to select. So for goodness sake, make sure you enjoy their company. When you sit down with him or her and you really want to make sure that they're listening to you and trying to get an understanding of what your ideal home will be. The more open and honest you are with the realtor, the more receptive they are to hearing your needs, the easier it will be to find the right one and help them work with you to choose the correct home. Ask their realtor about how they'll identify suitable homes for you. Many realtors will work with lists of exclusive properties that they market. Other realtors will work with an MLS system. You need to talk to them about how they're going to identify the right home for you and what they're willing to do to work with you to identify the right regions and the right properties. And you'll get an idea of the motivation for them to, in fact, work for you as an agent. Remember to read the paperwork carefully. When meeting with a realtor, you'll want to find out exactly who is paying the agent's fees. In some instances, you may be creating a buyer's agency agreement where you honor to pay the agent fees if, in fact, they don't consider they've earned enough commission on a particular property. In many cases, the seller's going to be paying those fees, as we've discussed, but in some instances, a realtor may talk to you about the benefits of signing a buyer's agency, where in fact you will underwrite some of the costs. So be aware of that. It's not a negative thing, it's just something that you should be aware of before you sign that paperwork. As we mentioned, you really want to talk about networking. Many realtors can refer you to competent mortgage professionals, home inspectors, termite inspectors, appraisers, contractors, and other professionals who can help you through the home buying process. Ask about these networks when choosing your realtor. Geographic familiarity is important. You're going to find that some realtors will specifically work in one area, whilst others will generally work in the region. Neither is particularly better than the other. What you need to do in that discussion is just talk about how that particular realtor works. From a buyer's perspective, you need to ask a few questions to see what the realtor's experience is for your needs. You may be looking at 2 or 3 parts of town, and working with one realtor is a lot easier than working with 3 or 4 realtors. In fact, generally a realtor is going to require that you continue to work with them as you look in one particular region. As we mentioned, neither is better, and often the ability to find an answer to a question rather than knowing that question off the top of your head is a better solution. How does a realtor communicate? This is important, particularly in this day and age. It's crucial in the home buying process. A good realtor is going to keep you informed without you having to bug them all of the time. You may see some red flags early on in the process here, and chances are if you do, that relationship's going to get worse. So keep this in mind before you commit to any particular realtor. There are many tools to communicate today, including Skype, email, Facebook, whatever it may be. The important thing is that you're comfortable with that form of communication. I remember only a few years ago being told by a realtor in another board area after we'd tried to send her a few electronic files that I would never amount to a good realtor if I didn't learn to use Canada Post. Quite frankly, I really couldn't tell you truthfully where my post office is in my town because I really don't ever use it. I find it much more efficient and convenient to send files electronically. But you may prefer to receive documents in the mail, and then you need to talk to the realtor about how you prefer to work. In conclusion, you need to remember that instincts will go a long way when choosing a realtor. So trust them, ask plenty of questions, and don't feel like you're being a pest for doing so. That realtor should make you feel comfortable to ask any questions that you choose to. Remember, you have the most at stake in this relationship, so you should be the one doing the proactive research and asking all the questions. Well, here we are, the wrap up to the discussion. I want to talk about the 5 top hints to avoid making what I feel are big mistakes. First of all, and we've tried to press this home already, you need to get a financial pre-approval. It's really like going shopping with cash in your pocket. In the end, you're going to avoid disappointment of putting an offer on a house that you don't have the finances for, and so all that will happen is you'll be declined. It's very important, and you can only do this with the help of a professional. Don't fall in love emotionally with a home. There's bound to be some emotion in this process, but if you followed our earlier advice, you should be able to avoid this. However, be aware of your negotiating position. It is seriously compromised as soon as your heart takes over from your head. It's not always a negative to fall in love with a home. You may like the home for the right reasons, but the addictiveness of falling in love with a home, particularly one that's more than you can afford, puts you in a position of often paying more than the home is worth to secure your dream. Don't try and lessen the budget by avoiding professional advice. In the long run, it can be a very expensive mistake. Whether it's the services of a realtor, or a home inspector, or a mortgage broker, or a lawyer, these people make a living at what they do because they're good at it and they're trained to do it. Make sure you follow the advice on how to select a realtor, and the same general principles follow for the other service providers. Remember, you're the client, and they are there to serve your needs. Don't over-purchase. Any investment is subject to systematic risk. The mitigatable risk, it's somewhat predictable, and we can learn to work with it. Systematic risk is increased markedly when we over-purchase. We're also subject to unsystematic risk in our economy. These are areas that we can't control. We find it hard to plan for. Again, overspending on your budget puts you in the very dangerous position where a slight change in our economy or your employment circumstances can put you in economic jeopardy. Stick to your budget. And then, of course, before you even start this process, don't rack up unnecessary consumer debt prior to applying for your mortgage or looking for your first home. Purchasing a new car on credit, lease, or finance, and getting that shiny new Costco credit card is seriously likely to impact your approval for financing. Drive an older car, pay cash for goods and services, and wait until you're settled into a new home before you purchase that new big screen TV. Figuring out the costs for the first year or so can be a challenge. Never getting to find out that can be a bigger challenge. Fixing various financing mistakes before you're eligible for financing approval can take several months, and in that time, the market may have moved up significantly and put that first-time home out of your reach. Well, we've come to the end of our program today, and I really hope that you've found a nugget or two of information that can be useful to you. You'll find more information at KelownaBuyer.com and a useful ebook for first-time home buyers specifically. It covers the content in today's seminar, as well as providing some useful forms and links to other professionals in the area as you start your house hunting journey. I want to wish you the best in this process. It's a very exciting time for you. And before we say goodbye, I want to introduce 2 people to you who last year were first-time home buyers, and we're going to ask them a couple of questions that you may find useful.